I finally got around to getting to a comic book that's current here. Now, this is one that actually came out yesterday, and I picked it up, read it, and now I'm ready to give some thoughts on it. But whenever Frank Miller writes something, or at least as far as I can remember, whenever he would write something, it seemed to be kind of a big deal. It was something of a little event whenever Frank Miller was going to be working on something. If you remember back in the day, probably his best known work for DC is, of course, Batman The Dark Knight Returns. And then in the early 2000s, I remember that he was making a sequel to that series called, I believe it was called The Dark Knight Strikes Again. And that was, people were buzzing about that. And not too long after that, I think, is when the first Sin City movie came out. And that also brought renewed interest to the Sin City graphic novels. So it was a good time, I would say, to be Frank Miller. And he was a name or a person, I would say, that was very revered in the comic book space. I'm not saying that he isn't, but it still seems that whenever he comes around, it's kind of still somewhat of a special event. I'm not sure if it still has the same kind of impact that it used to, or that it'll ever peak like it once did. But Frank Miller's, regardless of whether his writing is as good as it used to be or not, I think one can agree, I think most people would agree, that he's a guy that's really left his mark on certain characters in comic books. Specifically, I would say Daredevil. His run on Daredevil is legendary. And if you look at all the things that really kind of redefine Daredevil and that we kind of know to be kind of the standards and norms of Daredevil were really things that Frank Miller wrote. He, of course, also created Elektra, but just his entire run on it was fantastic. And I would say that's the one character that his writing probably had the most impact on because of how long he wrote that character. But I had heard about this, and this is something that I wanted to pick up, and that is Superman Year One by Frank Miller, art by John Romita Jr., and this is kind of a reimagined origin story for Superman. So, to the best of my knowledge, outside of the Dark Knight Returns, and I think Strikes Again, I don't think that Frank Miller has ever written anything specifically for Superman, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe something happened, or there's something that I'm just not remembering. But I thought, all right, it's going to be his take on Superman. And what the interesting thing about this one is, and where they're going with this, and I'll get to that in a little bit, is Superman's upbringing in Smallville, how he kind of establishes and learns his powers, things like that, and where his story is heading for his first, his first foray into being a superhero. So, of course, we get the classic origin story of Krypton being destroyed, then Kal-El being, traveling through space, finally making it to Earth, being found by the Kents. We know all of this. This is stuff that has been rooted in the Superman lore forever, and anybody who's done kind of a reimagining, with probably the exception of Red Sun, this is pretty much how it always starts. Always ends up with the Kents. But what I found interesting about this is there's a little bit of, I don't know if Frank Miller watched Smallville, but I feel that there's certain things that he might have been inspired by Smallville to kind of tell in a different way. And by obviously I mean Smallville, the TV show. So he's found, of course, he's raised, he's discovering his powers as he grows up, his abilities, his super strength, the heat vision, the ability to fly, all that good stuff. And as per we saw in Smallville and also any other kind of Superman-related works, there's this concerted effort, for the most part, by the Kents to try to keep that a secret and make sure that he doesn't stand out too much so that any unnecessary attention will be drawn to him and something happens. So, but be that as it may, the way Clark is kind of portrayed in this, he seems to be well adjusted, which is kind of the same, the way he's always been. But one thing I will say is that he seems to be a little bit more brooding than typical iterations of Clark Kent growing up that I've seen. So that's where I feel it's kind of a little bit of Clark Kent from Smallville, because there was times where Clark was like that in Smallville, where he was a little bit brooding. He was well adjusted, though. He could be social when he wanted to be. You know, but he really identified more with the kids that were kind of the outsiders and the geeks of the school, but seemed to be well adjusted for the most part. You know, he would get messed with, but nobody really bullied him in the way that, say, his friends were bullied and things like that. And we see that. And there's definitely this sense of justice about him that we see Frank Miller establish in the story, which is kind of, again, true to the character. Just when he sees his friends get bullied and really wanting to do something about it, but knows that, you know, if he does anything to them, not only will it'll be bad for him, but also that he realizes how much power that he possesses, and he's trying to find a way to make sure that justice is served here against these bullies, but without doing something that not only that he can potentially regret, but that will be something that can impact the people around him, right? So there's things that he does, and he really tries to minimize a lot of the interactions. Like, all he's doing, like right here when these bullies attack him at school, he knows, he's very well aware. He doesn't let his emotion get the best of him, because he knows what he could truly do to him if he wants. And he's really trying to control the amount of force he uses with them. But even just this kid, he just blocks, and the kid's hand is hurt. This other kid, he knows that he's like, all right, I'm not going to push him with all the force I have, but even with just a little bit, like the tiny bit of force that he uses, he knocks the kid back, and the kid's just, you know, he gets knocked back and slides across the hallway and stuff. So, of course, because of this, first time getting in trouble, parents aren't too pleased about it, and he explains to his mom in this scene that, hey, you know, it's not fair what these kids do, and I'm just trying to bring justice here. And his dad agrees with him, but his dad also tells him, like, hey, you know, you're right, but you got to realize, just kind of like, you got to realize you're not like them. You're much, what you can do is beyond human. Just kind of reminds him of these things, that he's far beyond any of these kids. And just kind of reaffirms things that we've seen again with Jonathan Kent in the past and his interactions with Clark, is that, hey, look, you obviously have a bigger purpose, but these kind of small situations, there's ways for you to handle it, and you can find justice to get for these people, you know, in this situation, but you got to be smarter about it. You have to, it can't just be about just using your gifts. You got to use your brains a little bit here. So him and Lana come up with a plan to basically get dirt on these kids, because nobody's checking these kids. Apparently these kids are like a little mafia, this bully gang at school, which is pretty ridiculous. Nobody really confronts them, and Lana gets pictures, she gets some evidence. Clark kind of reveals to her his secret, because, you know, this is his high school sweetheart. This is the girl that he has a crush on. And of course, this ends up, you know, starting the relationship between them. So all stuff that we've known and that has been established in previous Superman stories, whether it be Smallville, the TV show, or, you know, early Superboy works, things like that. Everybody knows Lana was his main squeeze in high school. So, but what's interesting in where this goes, and this is one thing I wanted to talk about real quick too, that I thought kind of paralleled Smallville a little bit, is the fact that he joins the football team. Although the name of the team is the Wolves, and in Smallville, the TV show, it's the Crows. It's the Smallville Crows. But basically, in the TV show, it took him forever to convince his parents to let him be on the football team, because his father is the one that had the biggest reservations. Like, hey, look, you know, what if you truly, you know, like, what if you hurt somebody, and, you know, you can't really, if you're going to do that, you can't really use your powers and stuff like that. And he doesn't. But in this one, he seems to be, and not just in this scene here, but it seems like throughout the entirety of this book, he seems a little bit more willing to take the chance using his abilities and not really thinking about the consequences. Whereas in, say, the Smallville TV show, he was much more cognizant of that and was not as willing to use his powers as frivolously, I guess would be the best way to say it. So, but in this, he realizes, hey, I got these powers. I'm not. All these guys try to tackle him, and he still makes the goal. And everybody's like amazed by his athleticism. They just think it's just this freak athleticism that Clark has, and he's of course the hero of the school. Wins the girl, all that good stuff. Star football player. And then there's this point where he's senior in high school, and he's talking to his dad and realizes that he feels like he has a greater purpose and he needs to do more. He needs to really kind of go beyond what he's been doing. And he knows that in order to do that, in order to become the man that he needs to be, he needs to leave Smallville. And the decision he's come to is that he's going to leave and he's going to join the Navy, which at this point you got to remember, the Kents know that he has all these superhuman abilities. They know that he's able to jump really high, run really fast, fly. He has super strength, but they're not aware of his invulnerability. They don't know. Like Martha Kent is worried because she doesn't know. Oh, he leaves. He might go and get killed somewhere. So they don't know that he's indestructible yet. So there's concerns with him leaving, but they know that, hey, look, we got to let him go because he would end up probably leaving anyways. So it pretty much ends off on the Kents letting him go. He's on his way to boot camp pretty much, and he sees Lana kind of gives him a send-off from far away because he uses his telescopic vision and his hearing to be able to know that she's giving him a send-off. So it ends with pretty much him leaving to the Navy, and it's interesting. It's interesting. I'm not going to say that this was like nonstop action or fun. It's obvious Frank Miller's establishing some stuff here, but I'm very interested to see where he goes with this idea of Superman being in one of the armed forces and what kind of change he can affect as pretty much being a military man traveling the world and how different that's going to be. So I like it so far. John Romita Jr.'s art looks a little bit different in some instances in this, but after a while you still see it. It's John Romita Jr. But so far so good. Looking forward to seeing what I guess book 2 has in store for us. So be sure to check this one out. I think it's worth picking up. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you got any recommendations, please let me know. Be sure to like the video, and until next time, y'all know how it goes. The hunt continues.